Alex, nothing stops us, even if our site is down.
Yeah, I mean, hell, you're apparently out in the woods, living the life Chris McCandless style, and somehow you are still able to get on and do this show. So congrats to you, sir.
Turns out you can get internet anywhere these days.
I
It's
know, right?
shocking. Was not aware that was possible. Yeah, this is actually my parents have a lake house in Wisconsin, and never had internet up here. But then as soon as and when I would come out here when I lived in San Francisco, that was fine because having maybe a weekend where you don't have the internet is not the worst thing in the world.
Sure.
But when I moved here, it was like, hey guys, I would like to be able to come up here at any time and be able to function as a human being that requires the internet to do their job. So I did that, and so now I can be up here and doing that, and it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Now your parents' retreat from society and the world is now plagued with connection to society and the outside world, is what you're saying.
Yeah, unfortunately. But it allows me to do this. I got this crazy giant Ethernet cord running from the router. I don't know. It's beautiful out here. I was jamming Earthbound remixes and sipping coffee, and there's forest behind me, and there's
Look at them trees.
Like if there's a hot tub behind me too. Look at that.
Ooh.
You kind of see the corner there.
Now, see, why aren't you doing this from the hot tub? Why are you not in the hot tub right now?
About it. I definitely gave it some careful consideration and then tried to figure out the logistics, and I woke up too late. But I guarantee I will at least attempt. I don't know. I'd have to
It's going to require a headset microphone, and it's going to require a lot of electronic sort of position, so there's no chance of them teetering into the hot tub.
Yeah.
But I think you can make it work. I think you can do it.
I got this. Hold on, wait, no, that's the wrong way. Okay, there's a banister there, and the banister is where the webcam could go. And that could shoot down over the hot tub. And this is all possible. This is all very possible.
Probable, even. I think you can do it.
And if there ever was a website to do a dumb morning show from a hot tub, Giant Bomb is the site to do it, even if that site is not up, which apparently a number of sites have been taken down. I guess our host is just in general down. So
yeah,
whatever.
So we'd say top men are on it, but frankly, we have no idea.
No, yeah, there could be. How's your week been going? What have you been playing?
Oh, geez, this week has been all right. I got NHL done. That review is up on the site. I mostly liked it, though. Man, EA Sports, I mean, not that they aren't known for kind of phoning it in at the end of a generation, but man, they're really phoning it in at the end of this generation.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that? Like the non-sports among us, like what is? Because I feel like I look at all of those games, and no discredit to the hard work that I'm sure goes into them, but when you look at them incrementally, it sort of always feels like they're phoning it in.
Yeah, and that's
in the sense that it's hard to know what changes, year to year.
That's not an unfair assessment, and the difference I will say is that the overall quality of EA Sports games is generally a little bit more suspect than say sometimes. Well, I don't know. It just depends on the game. Like NBA 2K is one of those franchises that you can always pretty much rely on to be at least generally very good, even if they don't do a whole lot year to year. Like the core gameplay is so good, and the things that they do fix are usually genuinely problems. So I rarely feel like they're just kind of cheating or just slacking off on one of their sequels. EA, there are always a lot of pervasive problems, especially in Madden. NHL has them occasionally too. FIFA occasionally, I'm told, has them as well. But like, there are just things that linger on and on endlessly, and they don't always get fixed. And in the case of this year, it's like Madden especially, the things they added were mostly meaningless, and the things they fixed weren't necessarily the things that needed to be fixed. And NHL has some of those problems too, where it didn't fix like the things that are not going to fix, like the fact that the menu system is a total disaster and has been for like at least 3 games now. They're not going to completely revamp that stuff because at the end of the generation, they can just start over again next year. So, it's one of those things where it's like you're playing the same game, the same core game is good, but there are all these little surrounding problems that they still have just not bothered to fix because they just either don't have the resources or the desire to do so.
I saw it somewhere this week, and that is a horribly vague thing to say about the internet, but there was an interview with a former Madden producer or someone that was high level at one of the sports sites of the there are sports sites dedicated just to video games. There are a couple of them, Is Operation Sports still around? I remember that used to be one of them.
I don't remember. I
Um,
remember that GameSpot bought one of them at some point, and
mm,
those guys became our sports editors, and then that kind of went nowhere. But
but anyway, there was an interview where the bits I saw brought out talked a lot about the difficulties of building year over year and some of the mistakes they had made over. Because basically, the way he was making it sound is that you sort of have to gamble on, okay, this is going to be our priority for the next couple of years, and we're going to iterate on it, we're going to build on it. And if you screw that up, like
yeah,
if you pick the wrong things to prioritize, you've really handicapped yourself for the next couple of years.
yep.
It's not like you can just turn the corner and start from scratch, or I don't know, I guess unless you want to completely sabotage the game and not ship 2 years in a row like the NBA team.
Yeah.
But that's just not, that's not possible for Madden. Madden has to ship. That is,
Yeah.
People will be executed. Assassins will be called in if that game does not make its ship date.
Yeah, and this year they had the added stress of having to throw in the next-gen versions, which is never a great thing for Madden because it splits their team, it splits their resources, and it puts them in a position where neither game ends up being all that impressive because they have to, they have to build this new engine, new graphics, do all that stuff for the new game, which ends up usually being pretty stripped down in terms of features. And then they have to put out the thing on the current-gen consoles, which will be a lot like the game you played last year. And this one was kind of a bummer, especially because it was like the 25th anniversary edition, so you were hoping, okay, maybe they have something they can kind of pull out of their asses to make it, more impressive than it's been over the last couple of years. And no, not really. Nothing that they added this year really spoke to me in any meaningful way. So unfortunately, this was not a great year for football games.
Have we seen the next gen versions yet?
They've shown a little bit of it. They showed it at E3 in a small demo, and I think they've shown it in a couple of private demos, but they haven't done like a big blitz for it yet. They usually don't until like basically the month before it comes out,
Okay.
because those games tend to come in so fucking hot that they're just kind of not. And they also don't want to cannibalize people who would be buying the current gen stuff in August, so they usually don't push that stuff as much until they get closer to the systems coming out.
Um, you saw some games this week, didn't you?
I did. Some I can't talk about yet.
Okay.
The WB stuff I cannot talk about yet because it is embargoed until next week.
All right.
But I did see Batman, and I will be able to talk about Batman next week. I
Okay.
did, however, since we're on the subject of sports games, I did actually go see a new thing for NBA 2K14 that I just want to share because it's maybe the most ridiculous thing I've seen in a sports game in a while.
Great.
So LeBron James figures heavily into this year's game. He's the cover guy. He's apparently he picked the soundtrack for the games, which is sort of what Jay-Z did last year. So that's great. And he has his own story mode, and the entire story mode. So the entire story mode revolves around where LeBron's going to go when he hits free agency next year.
Oh, shut up!
Nope.
God damn it!
It's a two-path system. You can go down one path, which is he stays at the Miami Heat for the duration of his career, and he's still trying to win more championships than Jordan, and you just kind of go through. It's like event-based. There's like I think like individual games that play into an overall storyline as you go along. So with the Miami Heat one, you're just with the Heat. You're trying to to keep the Heat as a dynasty, that sort of thing. The other one is where he leaves the Heat. And in that one, you go to other teams and you play through games, with like it's not choice. Like you can't choose what team you go to. The game has decided what teams LeBron might go to.
Okay.
Which include the Knicks as well as maybe going back to Cleveland at some point.
Yes, you can be shanked.
So yeah, and so there's this whole progression to it where you're like, apparently there's a rivalry with like a young upstart that is calling himself the next LeBron. There's all this stuff, and it all has introductory voice acting by LeBron James. It is the weirdest, most intensely narcissistic thing I've maybe seen in any sports game in a while, which is saying something. I don't mind the idea of taking an individual player and sort of highlighting him, especially one who is a marquee player. I have a problem with it when that person is still in the NBA, still carving out his legacy, still, kind of hasn't. I mean, yeah, he's won a couple of championships, so obviously he's cemented some of his legacy. But this idea of propping up this guy to this level is something I'm maybe a little weirded out by. Like the mode itself seems fine. It's a story mode. There's stuff to do. It's different, certainly, than most traditional sports game story modes. But LeBron had to sign off on this, and the NBA had to sign off on this. So they had to sign off on the notion of, well, we want people to sit there and speculate endlessly about where LeBron might go because, let's face it, he's the league at this point. And that just, I don't know, that sits weird with me. It sits really weird with me.
And from my limited knowledge, I think even outsiders are aware of the decision and the media circus that surrounded LeBron picking where he went after Cleveland. But to build a story mode that essentially is the decision too, and then not have the decision in it, like having you sit in some sort of chair and talking to like an ESPN anchor or whatever, and getting
he wants to disavow that whole thing entirely.
I get that, but if you're gonna build this, it's got to have that moment. Like that seems like the whole thing.
This is all forward-looking. This is all looking toward LeBron's future, because that's what we're all really worried about. That's what the world is on, is bated breath about, is LeBron's future, where he's going to go. And actually, that's kind of true, because I watch, occasional ESPN sports shows. Like, I'll watch Pardon the Interruption or Around the Horn or whatever every now and again. And they're already talking about the fact that, like, what's LeBron going to do after this entire season? Because he still has one more full season in Miami he has to go through. And sports people are already like chomping at the bit to talk about where's he going to go, what's he going to do. So of course this plays right into that, and it's probably a perfect fit, and it's a great way to sort of highlight what it is people I guess are actually interested in when it comes to LeBron, which is less is he going to win more championships? Like, well, where's he going to go? And I don't know, if I was LeBron James, I would maybe look at this and go, I don't know if this is really the kind of thing I want to cultivate, but he did. He signed off on it. He's into it apparently. So yeah.
Well, now that we have sufficiently alienated most of our audience talking about the future of LeBron in the NBA,
sure.
I played a couple games this week. I played a decent number of horror games on a stream. Played almost 3 hours of Amnesia and Outlast. I think I'm about halfway through Outlast and maybe almost halfway through Amnesia. That game is supposed to be fairly short. What's really interesting about Amnesia, and it'll be curious to see how this plays out over the course of the rest of the game, is it sort of ditches a lot of the core mechanics of the previous Amnesia game, The Dark Descent, which is to say, in The Dark Descent, part of what made that game so genius is that when you went into hiding from the creatures, that there was a sanity meter, and that sanity meter was essentially your life bar. And to avoid being killed by the creatures, you have to hide in the dark. But when you hide in the dark, you are dying. So it was this incredible interlocking set of mechanics that all played off of each other that drove you to have to constantly change what you're doing because everything is killing you except holding out your lantern and moving forward. And then on top of that, your lantern had fuel. You had this tinderbox that you were constantly searching throughout the environment for and filling that up. So you had all of these things playing off each other that created additional layers of stress that went beyond just the fact that you were being chased in this weird mansion by these crazy Lovecraft creatures, and they were hunting you in the closets you were hiding in, which is already, I think, just the chasing part is terrifying enough for most people. But then when you add these stressful game mechanics, it's really what brought that game to another level. And
it's what almost killed it for me, and not in like a this game is bad kind of way, but in a this is way too stressful and way too intense for me kind of thing, because it is so much to balance and it is so much to keep track of, and already being kind of, a scaredy cat to begin with, having that extra layer of, well, also if I stay in hiding for too long, I'm going to die, definitely just kind of made me start tearing my hair out a little bit.
Yeah, it's one of those games that I've recommended to people, play it with a walkthrough, like try and at least eliminate part of the stress of playing the game, of trying to figure out where to go, and then maybe just try to enjoy the rest of the experience. But so in A Machine for Pigs, which was not created by the original developers, Frictional Games. They are rumored to be working on a sci-fi horror game, which sounds awesome.
Yes.
There was clamoring for another Amnesia, and they weren't sure what to do because they had no interest in progressing that series. So they handed it off to the Dear Esther developers at the Chinese Room, and they stripped out all of those mechanics. So you still have a lantern, but it functions forever. There is no fuel to it. You can hide it and use it at will. You do have to hide it when there are creatures around, which in the Spookin' with Scoops that we did on Wednesday, I encountered the first creature, and so you put that away to hide. But there's no sanity meter, there's no lantern, and while I understand why those mechanics are gone, I think it makes the game much more accessible. I can't help but be a little disappointed that it makes it a much more simple experience. But
Sure.
what I also enjoy about it is that, on the other hand, it allows you to sort of get into the mood of the game and explore the world in a way that is a little bit less stressful, because you can keep the lantern out and you can look at the artwork and you can check out the fine details of what they put into the world they've built, and not feel like every time you're doing that, well, I should probably go load a previous save so I still have all of that my lantern left, which is something I
Right.
did every once in a while in Amnesia. So I don't know, it's interesting. There was actually a pretty brilliant review of the game on Kotaku this week by Kirk Hamilton, who's one of my favorite writers, and he proposed that maybe we should look at Amnesia: Machine for Pigs not necessarily as a sequel, but that maybe as a template for a bunch of other developers to work off of, which is to say, Amnesia: The Dark Descent presents sort of like a template, and that maybe going forward, it's sort of just an anthology series, sort of like what
Sure.
Halloween was supposed to turn into before that just became about Michael Myers and ran itself into the ground. I
Or,
mean,
you know, to a lesser degree, what American Horror Story is on
a
FX. Each
little bit.
season is a different thing.
Yeah, but I mean, I think like in Halloween, I think the reason Halloween 3: Season of the Witch had nothing to do with Michael Myers was because that was John Carpenter's original vision, was
Right.
that it would be about something different each time, and it's why it was generically called Halloween. So the idea that Amnesia could be sort of a creep show or Halloween for video games, I think is a really cool idea. I don't know if they're thinking at all in that direction, but I would love if sort of just the idea of you're a guy exploring a world, things chase you, and you have a lantern is just the template, and then other developers kind of go off and do their own thing. That could be really cool if they're
I can
interested in
I can
pursuing that.
I can think of at least a few studios I would love to see take a crack at something like that. I think there are at least a few indie studios out there that definitely would have some interesting ideas with that template.
Yeah. So I'm continuing on that. Spoon with Scoops is on hold until October, which isn't far away. But I also kind of need to just sit down and barrel through those games, because the amount of games coming out is sort of starting to stack up. I was all caught up, and now I'm all back again. I
You're
haven't
almost done
played.
with that last, right?
I'm almost done with Outlast, and Amnesia's pretty short, so I can probably get through both of those next week. But also, I mean, next week is Grand Theft Auto,
I
so
know.
and I'm
So
not prepared for
that's
that
at
at all.
least 30 hours of your time right there, pretty much gone.
Yeah, You know what? That is. I've had vague conversations with people who have early copies of the game and are playing it, but I'm trying to. I actually don't want to know too much.
Sure.
But that is chiefly the thing I am curious about, is how long that campaign is. Because I have to imagine it's going to be, as much as I've wanted Rockstar to start paring down their campaigns and just sort of focus on stories and put some more stuff on the side. With the fact that there are 3 characters that you can switch
Right.
between, my guess is this is going to be the standard 30 to 45 hour Rockstar campaign.
Yeah, I've heard anecdotally from multiple people that it's about as lengthy as you know, kind of a Grand Theft Auto game tends to be.
Right.
You know, it maybe has a little extra just because of the multiple character thing, but you know, I think, you know, it's one of those games where like every time they put a new one out, they're like, oh, there's like 100 hours worth of stuff to do, and you know, honestly, most people get done in like 30, 35 with all the side stuff, maybe 40, you know. And that's fine. That's more than enough game for me. It's not like I've ever like played a GTA game and been left wanting for more. It's usually like, oh god, all right, do I have to do this tank mission now before I can finally get to the end? Okay, cool, right, sure, all right, I'll just get this done. Just give me the bazooka. Just spawn in the bazooka so I can end this quickly.
Yeah, I mean that's always, and I think 4 was especially egregious with this sort of, at least what I find to be a fault of Rockstar storytelling, of just they've got so many stories they want to tell, but they cram them all into one character.
Right.
And so it's one thing if they were playing it like Saints Row, where your character is just sort of a blank slate that, you know, has a bit of personality, but he mostly is just a projection of whatever story that they want to tell. But
Yeah.
no, like they craft a character that has a backstory, that has an interesting setup, and you know, Nico's character in 4 starts out really fascinating. You know, like leaving, you know, a country at war to try and start over, like this whole immigrant story. Like, it was great, and then they just sort of destroy him by the end by the sheer volume of storytelling that they try and put in there. So maybe 3 characters spreads that out for them. You know, I think Red Dead Redemption. I was not a big fan of the Mexico arc.
Right.
Even though going into Mexico is one of the most amazing moments, probably in a video game.
Yeah.
The Mexico arc I felt like was complete padding. And I've always just wished that they would put that stuff to the side, make those side characters or something. And so I'm hoping that 3 characters gives them a chance to, if they're gonna maintain the 30 to 40 hour structure, gives them a way to sort of spread that out. Because some of my favorite stuff that Rockstar has ever made was the DLC for 4.
Right.
I thought the Lost and Damned and Ballad of Gay Tony were both
phenomenal,
incredible. Lost and
Yeah.
Damned is like playing the Sons of Anarchy game that is never going to get made or be any good, even if it did get made.
Right.
And it was I both are great, although I liked Lost and Damned more just because the biker stuff was cool.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, it's like I think a lot of people shit on GTA 4 more than it deserves. That game has problems, and it's certainly one of them is the fact that it does try to tell way too many stories with way too many characters. But there are some great characters in that game. Brucey's in that game. Brucey's the
absolutely.
best. And there's at least, I'm going to say a solid half dozen characters that I totally loved in that game. And yeah, I think spacing it out amongst 3 different characters who seem, despite having common goals, to have relatively disparate personalities and interests is a good call. Because in a way, it seems like they're kind of riffing on, some of the different character archetypes they've already done multiple times over, but just in this sort of, combined story thing. And I don't know, that interests me. I think I as much as the Housers, seem to kind of operate in their own little bubble, I'm always interested in like what they have to say, what they feel like riffing on. Even when it doesn't work, you can kind of see a germ of a good idea in there most times. So it's like, I don't know. I find even their failures kind of fascinating. So, as much as I don't like to just, blanket praise people, I've never, with the exception of the PSP games, I've never played a GTA game I didn't enjoy. So I'm
I was gonna say, are you a big fan of Manhunt 2? Are you the Manhunt 2's unsung champion?
No, I mean I think Manhunt 2 is a bad game, but I also think it's kind of an interestingly bad game. I think
I never played 2. What is interesting about Manhunt 2 specifically?
I never finished it, so I never got all the way through it, but what I will say is that it's interesting from the perspective of someone who plays a lot of Rockstar games, because it does feel like the most kind of like slapped together, like least fleshed out and coherent thing they've ever done. Like it's one of those things where I'm fascinated by the fact that they even signed off on it, because it seems like the kind of thing they would look at and go, fuck no. But they did. They put it out, and I'm actually kind of surprised. Manhunt 1 had an idea that was horrifying and weird and fucked up, but at the same time, there was something there you could kind of grasp onto and go, well, I kind of get what they're going for with this. Manhunt 2, I didn't really get very much of that. It felt like they were just doing it because they could.
Sure. One thing I will mention at this point in the show is that because we don't have a traditional chat, and honestly, I don't even know where the chat would be in YouTube if I wanted to check it. I don't. But if people want to ask
questions, probably for the best you don't know that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sometimes I check YouTube comments and.
Mm-mm.
If you have questions, just at me on Twitter at Patrick Klopik. I've got some queued up, so if you want to shoot those over to me, I will check that as we wind through the show. The other game, you can't really finish it, but I guess I have finished as much as I will play for the time being. Is Papers, Please. Which, because I hadn't had a chance to play Rayman Legends yet, I decided, you know what, Papers, Please seems like also a good complement to a horror game where it's the complete opposite. It is a bunch of rules and trying to apply those rules and trying to keep my morals in check. It just feels like a good contrast to these other games that I was playing. And so at this point, I have the demo is 8 days, or I guess the web game is 8 days, and this goes up to 31. But there are endings that can play out in between, and then there are endings that culminate in the 31 days that you can get to. So I actually got through all 31 days with all of my family intact. Did you have everyone alive by the end of it?
I didn't when I played on easy, or I did when I played on easy mode. I didn't when I played on normal. So
what changes in easy mode? Easy
mode, you get more money. Like you
Okay.
basically just have more money to work with. So it's you have to make way less brutal decisions when it comes to am I going to keep the heat on or am I going to buy medicine, that kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah. So I managed to. So there's I guess this is a slight spoiler, but not really. There are moments throughout the game where you can accept bribes, and some of those bribes are bigger than others. And at one point, I accepted a very large bribe that allowed me to not only upgrade my apartment, but then at a point where I was going to have people dying or things of that nature, I was kind of able to use that bribe money and get everyone back on track, and it was enough to sort of like steady everyone, that when the bribe money was eventually found and taken away from me, I at least everyone was in a place that we were going to make it to the end of the 31 days.
Well, that's good.
But yeah, that game is something else, because I started playing it in longer and longer chunks, and more than an hour of playing Papers, Please, it really does start to feel like work, and I started to be like have this itch where like I don't really want to play it anymore. Like it's boring, but that's also the point, right? Like
it's repetitive action. Yeah.
Yeah, but then I wanted to keep playing because of the point where I was getting bored was the point where I had come up with ways, I had a very specific series of steps that I was doing to be the most efficient to check the problems in these passports and security documents and vaccine things that the different stuff that they throw at you. The part where I was the most bored was when I was the best at the game because I had become so efficient at looking through things. It was just a really weird contrast, but it was also incredibly satisfying when you have people go through the checkpoint and you have that like 3-second lull where you're waiting to hear cha-cha-chunk, cha-cha-chunk, cha-cha-chunk to tell you if you got it wrong. And when you didn't have that moment and you did pass them through and you had applied all the rules or checked the things that you needed to check, there was a certain satisfaction from being part of the bureaucracy. But what was weird about it is, so in video games there are all sorts of rules that you're interacting with, but and some games judge you against those rules in a sort of an abstract way when you're playing like a Devil May Cry or a Bayonetta and you get sort of scored at the end. Or there are just purely, a score in the corner, and that's telling you how well or how poor you're doing. But in Papers, Please, the rules are so black and white. They are so matter of fact. And then you apply those rules to the best that you can do in that situation or what you think you have done to the best of your power, and then you send it off to be judged. And then it comes back and you miss something, or you didn't miss something. And I found that to be incredibly stressful because you're sending it off to get judged while at the same time bringing in the next person, and then you have this moment of, damn, I fucked up, or yes, I did it, and then you've moved on to the next person and are already starting to break down their paperwork. It's unlike anything I have ever played, and
well, it's like a flip on the typical reward system where it's like, the punishment is endless punishment, whereas, the reward is literally just you didn't fuck up. That's it. All you did right was just not get something wrong. So you feel rewarded just by having actually gone through and looked at every single dumb, minute detail in that thing and going, yes, I did a satisfactory job. That is great. I have to imagine that's exactly what border agents in real, communist countries felt like. Yes, I did a good job here. I am benefiting the state. Glory to Aristosca.
Yeah. Oh, man. And so I think I ended up getting 4 different endings. I don't want to spoil how some of them play out, but some of the ways that
shit gets weird.
Specifically, there was one ending that I had no idea that could have been a trigger, and I'll have to talk to you about it off camera because I don't want to spoil it for anyone. But
I might not have gotten that one yet. So
yeah, there are 20 endings, and I think I'll probably go back at some point and check out a couple of the others. But yeah, it's unlike anything I've played, and I have to it cannot come more highly recommended. It's just a weird thing. What a weird year for video games. We're talking about GTA 5, and then a game like Papers, Please, and on some way they're both impressive on the same level for completely different reasons, and that makes me so happy about the state of video games that we can even have discussions like that.
Well, this was the goal all along, right? It was to have the big blockbusters and a nice undercurrent of weird indie stuff, kind of coexisting in the same market, being able to succeed on their own terms and their own merits. That's what everyone's always wanted all along, and it seems like in the last couple of years that's finally become pretty viable. Like lots of different studios are able to make their weird passion projects while often in regular video game land, regular-ass video games are still coming out at a regular clip. And yeah, there are budget problems and people are having, cost issues on that level, but those games aren't going away. People are still excited about those games. People are still excited about new hardware, while in the meantime, the indie scene is off doing its thing and cultivating its audience, and that's great.
Yeah. All right, well, there weren't not too much big news that broke since we talked on Monday, but I got a couple headlines. We got a couple of things.
I got a couple of things, too.
Why don't you start us off?
No, you start.
All right. So this is it. So the headline itself is not what I find interesting. It's
Sure.
sort of the subtext. But so we have increasingly, both for consumers and as members of the media, gotten less and less data in terms of how the industry is doing sales-wise. The MPD
Hmm.
group, who is sort of the ones that every month they release, here are the best games, the top 10. We used to get sales numbers for every single one of those games, and we
Yes,
don't
I remember
anymore.
that.
My understanding is that that was a result of industry pressure, and the industry wanted those numbers to be in a position where the industry only released the numbers that they wanted to. And because the NPD only functions based on people buying their numbers, they essentially uh, did what the industry asked them and started hiding more of those numbers, so that they could continue to have people pay to get access to the whole database. Now, what the NPD provides for people who pay is really extensive. Like, you can see like individual sales figures for, like, the game that is the 300th sold of the
Right.
month. Like, it is incredibly intricate and really fascinating. I've had a chance to look at one of those spreadsheets before, and it is really cool. But what I find fascinating is, so there's Nintendo has started releasing super specific figures. I'm not sure if you've seen some of this stuff, but
I saw the stuff that came out this week about like Mario and Luigi and Pikmin and that stuff.
yeah, like, not only are they releasing physical figures, but they're releasing digital figures, and like
Right.
digital sales figures are one of the most, like, closely held secrets in games right now. I mean, Valve, as much as people collectively love Valve and Steam, like, they are as hidden with their data as anyone could be. They don't release any of that stuff because they use that data to do their dark business to convince people to do crazy sales and things like that. But I think it is also terrible that they don't release any of that information, because every other industry is incredibly transparent about some basic level of information about how their products are doing.
Yep.
You look at movies, you look at books, you look at music. All of that stuff is incredibly transparent. And video games, as far as I can tell, are the as big as they are incredibly secretive about just how they're doing. And it's really frustrating, because the reason I have gotten away from doing anything in terms of sales data on Giant Bomb, other than the fact that armchair analysis can get a little tiring, especially because we are not financial analysts,
No.
is that we don't even have good numbers to work with.
No.
So if we can't even start in a position of, this is how the industry is doing on a base level with just numbers, like, what's the point of even speculating? So I just sort of abolished it completely, because there's just no point. And I find that really frustrating, because even though I'm not that interested in being the armchair analyst, it is nice to kind of get a sense of where things are relative to other things. And
Yeah.
we can't even do that anymore. And I just find it really frustrating. And so I know that Nintendo's only doing it so they can brag. Like, the only reason any numbers come out are
Right.
so that it can be for their own nefarious means. But at least they're giving out numbers, and it at least gives some sense of what Nintendo considers a barometer for their own success.
That is the most interesting part to me, because when you look at the numbers that they put out, like Mario and Luigi sold 190,000 copies digitally and through their retail copies over the last month, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I'm guessing that's probably more than they were initially targeting for U.S. release for that game when they were projecting. Otherwise, they wouldn't put the number out there. Same with Pikmin, which was like 115,000 units or something, which I guess given current Wii U sales is probably not that bad.
Right.
There's a couple of things about MPD that I've always found really weird. One, and this is more of a question. I don't know if they still don't track Walmart sales. There was a long time where they just didn't include Walmart sales in anything that they did, because they just couldn't get access to that data for some reason. I never really understood why that was.
I mean, it's because I have stopped paying attention. My understanding was the way that they dealt with that that is probably still the case. I think Walmart's just very secretive about their data.
Right.
They have an algorithm that accounts for that. So the
Sure.
sales are not just the game sales minus Walmart. I think those sales are the sales of the game taking into
the
account
projected Walmart numbers.
Yeah, the projected Walmart numbers.
So they're not 100%, but they're like 95% or something. And then for a long time, NPD didn't track digital stuff at all. I don't know what their digital tracking is like now. I don't know what services they actually have that data for.
I don't know either, but I know that was generally and I think it's still a through-line criticism of NPD is that they can't have a full grasp of the sales data for digital, especially when you're talking about something like Steam.
Yeah.
And at the point that you are not including marketplaces like Steam, you're providing a disingenuous 30,000 point view of the industry, especially when you start to get headlines about like, oh, the video game industry is slowing down, oh, sales are worse year over year. It's like, okay, well, maybe that's true in the physical realm, but you're ignoring pure digital games that are maybe selling better than some of these games that are going to physical, and misrepresenting the health of the industry at a time when it's in great transition in terms of where it sells its games and how it sells its games.
Yeah, that's the thing I find incredibly vexing, is because that data could be put to some. It's not just for bloggers to rubberneck at what's failing and what's succeeding. It's that data can be useful from the perspective of trying to say, hey, look, here's what the industry is doing right now. Here's where it actually stands. Here's what games we're actually able to put out there and sell more than our projected copies of, and what we're not. Movies, it's like, there are lots of movies you go in, you're like, this is going to be a total bomb, and then it is. But movie studios don't try to hide that. They'll sometimes try to hide what the budget of the movie was, so it doesn't look like they lost as much money. But other than that, it's like that data is just out there for people to see. I guess I just don't really understand what the benefit is to publishers and studios to hide that information from the general public, because I feel like, yeah, it looks bad when your game doesn't sell, but if you consistently put out data that shows what the average of what games tend to sell is, people will eventually understand this is the normal. Like, this is sold normal. Just because it didn't sell 8 billion units like Call of Duty doesn't mean it isn't a successful game. People learn that over time when they get that data fed to them on a regular basis. You know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe you follow movies a little more closely than me. Maybe you can explain this term that I've never quite understood. So I've seen this mostly when I remember when it was the Disney bomb with the guy from Friday Night Lights.
John Carter?
John Carter, and then I also saw this in Lone Ranger. Yeah. What does it mean when it says like Disney's going to write down $200 million of a movie? Do you have any idea what that means? That
basically says they're taking it as a loss.
Okay, but why do they call it a write-down?
I don't know. It's just that's just the terminology they use. Maybe there's a more nuanced explanation for it. I don't really know what that means. I just know that when they say that, it usually means that they have accepted this is the amount of money they're going to lose on this.
Okay, interesting.
And I think that's for like their quarterly projections and stuff like that. So that's where that comes into play.
I got you.
If nothing else, we'll always have VG charts, right?
Yeah. VG charts. Anytime I see any article and then the source is VG charts, I just
shake your head and you're just like,
Mark is spam. Mark is spam.
Yeah. I don't know. People want to know this stuff. I mean, when I was working at Harmonix, people would look at the leaderboards for individual DLC songs to try and extrapolate how many copies that song sold.
Well, that is not you can't take that as pure sales data, but that is at least
it's an idea.
For digital games, like digital-only games, where you can assume that if someone bought it, they are connected to the internet, and then leaderboards do provide at least a data point. But again, that shows how goddamn desperate we are for any sort of sense of what does it mean to be a success in this industry, is when we are using leaderboard data to provide some sort of data point for the sales of the game.
And we are going to remain desperate, because it doesn't sound like anyone in any facet of the industry has any interest in cluing us in on this stuff, which is unfortunate, but what are you going to do?
Yep. So, yeah.
Speaking of Steam and their nefarious ways, they announced a thing this week.
Family sharing.
Yeah, family sharing is coming to Steam this week, or not? I don't know if it's out yet or if it's coming soon, but it is coming
next week.
Next week. So
for 1,000 people.
This is the thing that was talked about much amid the Xbox One changeovers. This was something that Microsoft specifically dropped because it was losing its always online functionality. Now Steam has it. It will be good for up to 10 people in your friends and family group. I think it's think it's only on. I don't know how many machine, like what the machine limit is. I mean, is it just 10?
It's yeah. So I guess let's back up a second. So basically,
Yeah,
what this
sure.
is you can. It is not uncommon for people to share their Steam passwords with their friends and family so they can access communal libraries.
I don't do
What
that.
either do I. Well, I don't have anyone that I could give it
I have
to.
no friends or family. Oh God.
I've no one that is into any of my friends or family that's into games are not into PC games. But it's not an uncommon thing for people to do. And what family sharing does is essentially just turns password sharing into a feature. So what you
Right.
can do is you can share your library with up to 10. Uh, you can authorize up to 10 accounts or 10 devices. So I think it could be 10 different people or just 10 different computers. I'm not 100% sure on how that works out, but that's sort of like the nitty gritty. What the larger point is that you can share your library with other people, but
Yep.
anytime someone uses that library, you are not allowed to use that
Right.
library.
It's one person at a time.
Right, and when you're using the library, if they try to use the library, it prompts them to say, hey, this is already in use. Would you like to purchase this game?
Right.
And then you can use it on your account. What by also streamlining this, you can earn your own achievements. You can have your own cloud saves. So even though you're leveraging someone else's library, you can be using your Steam account, be earning achievements, have your own saves. This doesn't allow you to circumvent purchasing a second copy if you want to do co-op. But you can access things like DLC if those have been purchased on the base account. And this is fascinating. I think this probably appeals to a pretty small group. But in terms of, we talk a lot about digital rights. This is giving us something that I think is really interesting and is perhaps the first step towards allowing us to, maybe at some point this is, you could, if you're done with the game, can you put it up on the Steam Marketplace and let people bid? And then you lose the rights to that game, but it transfers to another library. I think this is the first step towards some really interesting and crazy ideas. Or, think about it this way. What if, I've shared my library with you, and then you decide you want to play, Left 4 Dead, but I'm going to go play Assassin's Creed. And then the Valve pops up and it says, hey, you can't do this. Patrick is playing on his library, but we'd like to offer you 50% off this game if you want to click right now and buy this game. There are
Right.
some nefarious things they can do
Oh yeah.
with their sales to try and prod people along to purchase those games out of their account. And yeah, I just think it's endlessly fascinating, and that Valve can just say, they announce it, and hey, it starts next week for 1,000 people, and then we'll iron out the kinks and start
Yeah.
rolling it out more broadly. Is just Valve is the only company that can pull that off.
Somewhere there is someone listening to this show right now is on their knees, Charlton Heston style, screaming, "You fools! You blew it up! You destroyed it! We could have had this on the Xbox!" But at the same time, what Steam is offering here sounds like a slightly less all-encompassing, slightly less I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it just sounds like it's kind of not as intense. I don't know how to describe this other than to say it seems like what Steam is doing is like a slightly lesser version of what Microsoft was talking about initially, but on the Steam side. I don't know. For me, this seems like a completely reasonable thing to have. I'm never going to use it. I know I'm never going to use it because I don't share things with people like hardly ever. But it's like you said, there is probably a small subset of people out there, friends and family, siblings who want to trade games, when they're separated, not on the same machines, that will certainly find a use for this. When it comes to the kind of stuff you're talking about, the sort of speculative stuff, I don't know. When I buy games, I usually don't really want to get rid of them, just kind of right after I'm done with them. I'm kind of a collector, so I've never really seen the point of just having something where you can just be like, well, I'm just going to throw this off to someone else digitally. But I have to imagine that like you said, that is kind of going to be the way of the future, because eventually this is all just going to be, digital marketplace stuff. So at some point, people have to find a way to be able to get rid of those games. And does that eventually kind of feed into that used games thing again, or is that sort of, or is that a solution for it? Because if you build a system like that, is that something you build specifically to try and get some of those, used sales money into the pockets of the developers?
It's hard to say. Some of the speculation has been that maybe family sharing won't go beyond what they're sort of implementing here. There's There's some legal concerns, especially when you
Right.
start talking about Europe, where there's a little more complications involved with digital rights and what people can do with the things that they purchase. This, maybe this only goes so far as to appease some legal concerns, and they don't go any further than this.
Yeah.
And I've also seen some commentary after this was announced, like, well, why is everyone just like, hey, yay, Valve? Like, everyone was so upset with Microsoft when they announced, a program that had, at least thematically, some similar ideas. There's a big difference between announcing a program and rolling it out. In this case, this is actually going to roll out next week.
Right.
So I don't think it's completely fair to compare them, especially when we aren't, at least for the time being, not going to be able to actually use what Microsoft was thinking about rolling out. But, Valve is starting from a different place. They are only adding things to what you can do with your games. They're not
Right.
removing them. Had Microsoft just announced this kind of program and there was no DRM, no always on, I think people would have been receptive to it. But in this case, Valve started at a place where retail and physical was not a concern. So they don't have to deal with the fallout of that, because in this case, they are only adding things that you can do with your library. So
Right.
I understand where people are coming from with that point of comparison, but I think it sort of falls apart pretty quickly when you start to consider the fact that that's just not something they have to deal with. So that can't even be a criticism levied against them,
Yeah.
because they didn't start from that place. It's a completely digital service. So
Well, I know it's also, just call it what it is and say that Microsoft did a terrible job of explaining why any of that stuff, that they had to get rid of because of those changes would have been beneficial. They
Right.
they messaged it terribly.
Go look at the family sharing website that has a FAQ and has very clear bullet points about how this works, and realize, when we talk about terrible messaging, like, this is what we're talking about. Like, all Valve did was put out a press release, put up a simple page. It explains 95% of the details of what you need to know about this. It leaves some things a little bit vague, probably on purpose. But there's really not a whole lot of confusion about what this is, why it's here, and what they're doing with it, which was the entire conversation about what Microsoft was doing after they announced sort of the details of their program. But
Endless conversation.
endless conversation. I don't know. I don't really have too much else.
I got a couple of things here. I don't know if you want to talk about. I don't know if you want to talk about that Ouya thing at all. The sort of developer clusterfuck that has come down on that thing.
Yeah. I put up a story about that earlier in the week. I mean, for people that aren't aware, there's not too long ago, we launched a Free the Games promotion, which is they were going to take $1 million and distribute that out to Kickstarter projects that raised at least $50,000 and promised to be Ouya exclusive for 6 months. And they would match dollar to dollar up to $250,000 for any project that went over $50,000 up until the $1 million was spent. And then also the fund that raised the most amount of money would get an additional $100,000 backing. So on its face, sounds like potentially an interesting idea to bring over some new content to the Ouya, which it desperately needs in order to maintain relevance as we start to get more of these micro consoles, as they're called, like the Game Stick coming out soon. And what ended up happening was that there were several Kickstarters that were sort of embroiled in some controversy over the way they raised their funds. Elementary, My Dear Homes, which is going to be an adventure game, and the one that's sort of the focal point of this, Gridiron Thunder, a sort of poor-looking football game that raised $170,000. And a lot of it seemed to be from friends, family, and buddies in Silicon Valley. If you look up KickTrack for Gridiron Thunder, there was an average of just under $1,000 per backer, which is crazy.
Yeah, that's stupid high.
And well against the averages you would expect in even other very high Kickstarters, like what's the one that the Citizen Project, or that space game, I don't know. Anyway, even the highest ones where the games have raised, you're looking at an average of maybe $50 to $60 on the very high end. And the real problem here is Kickstarter did a thorough analysis of both of those Kickstarters, and they ended up taking down the Elementary one and leaving up the Gridiron Thunder one. What Gridiron Thunder at worst has done is gone against the spirit of what this project, this contest was for.
Right.
And honestly, the real criticism comes down to Ouya. They had a deeply flawed program that what they should have done was said, hey, we're going to sprinkle money to different Kickstarter projects and say, hey, if you add Ouya as part of your launch, then then we'll oh, my thing stopped recording. Then we're going to give you some money, but that's not what they did, right? Like they had a flawed program, and now they have to deal with the consequences of a flawed program, and that seems to be on them.
The consequences of that flawed program seem to be a lot of developers actually actively speaking out against them. Like there are quotes from developers going around saying, I had a port of my game, ready to go for Ouya, but at this point I'm just going to shut that shit down until they can regain some credibility. And a lot of that has to do, I guess, with the statement they put out afterwards saying, we don't really understand this reaction and we're not changing this program, which, seems like maybe just slightly tone deaf in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I mean, I would understand if, these other developers, maybe against the spirit of the program, but played fair. Like, they may have, it's Ouya's own poorly designed contest rules. They should get that money fair and square, but it would have made sense for Ouya to say, hey, with the rest of the money, we're going to do X, Y, and Z to try and spread this out to projects that are more in the spirit of what we want to see on the platform. But they didn't, and, more to the point, in their blog post discussing the criticism, they essentially did not discuss the criticism or acknowledge any of the problems that developers have had. If you go through that comment section, there's a lot of really notable developers in there, very upset. Mike Bithell of Thomas Was Alone and Volume fame, and Richard Perrin of Cairo. Like, they're in trouble. And if the point that you start having developers become vocal about their problems, it's not just users deciding to pick on you because you're the tiny thing that's had some problems and a shitty controller. So it'll be curious to see what happens going forward.
Yeah, I don't know what the future of that device is. I mean, I've always been pretty skeptical of it and its success rate. And early on, it seemed like maybe they were starting to figure a couple of things out. Some games were starting to kind of pop up for that thing. And then, I don't know, like the last couple of months, it just seems like it's been nothing but negative. And I mean, yeah, I can understand why the Ouya people think that like maybe the media has it out for them, because it has been a lot of negative coverage. But you know what? It's not. None of that coverage seems unjustified or incorrect. Like, it all seems like this is stuff that they are genuinely kind of fucking up or doing that just is, not. I don't know, it's just, like you said, and if not necessarily, illegal, then certainly not in the spirit of what they're selling. And that, I don't know. It's like whenever I see little mini devices like that, I'm always kind of skeptical, because it always seems like the people that are running them and putting them together just don't have the firmest grasp of what they're doing. I mean, it happened, to a lesser extent, or certainly a less credible extent with something like the Gizmondo, and I'm not saying that these guys are scumbags trying to, pyramid scheme their way through this thing, but I don't know. Everything about the Ouya just seems ill-conceived and just kind of destined to flame out at some point, and I'm kind of getting the impression that might be sooner rather than later.
I think it goes to show that building a console is not easy.
It is very hard.
So, as easy as it is to kind of get upset at Nintendo at their missteps along the way, you look at something like the Ouya, and it's like, hey, this shit is hard. It's not like anyone can do it. So.
All right. Well, you want to jump into some shorter headlines before we take some questions?
Yeah. Fire away.
All right. Well, I don't know, maybe this will end up being a longer one for you, but G4 is no longer going to become the Esquire network. NBC has decided to take the Style network and revamp that into its weird men's, whatever network. Meanwhile, G4 will continue to exist as it has, which is to say it will continue to air Ninja Warrior and Cops reruns and basically have no original programming and no editorial oversight or any of that stuff. You are someone who once worked for G4. I don't know what your feelings are of what that thing had become or became, but how do you feel about all this?
I mean, G4 has been a dead man walking for a long time, even when Adam Sessler was still there and X-Play and Attack of the Show, the sort of two notable things that network was doing. G4 in general just had no structural support from upper management, and by that I mean NBC Universal, who purchased them a number of years ago. I think while I was still there, we got purchased, and that's part of the reason I left. There were other considerations there too, but G4 just didn't have much of a future and hasn't had much of a future for a long time. And so, if you look at the nitty-gritty of how this happened in terms of them going to Style as opposed to G4. It's purely, Style has a bigger reach. I think they can reach 10 million more homes
They have a
than
bigger
G4
reach. They have
does.
more overlap with other networks that NBC Universal already has.
Right, and so it's purely a numbers game for them. And what this means for the future of G4 is that G4 will be continue to do reruns. Those reruns will make some money for them with zero effort. I mean, even when I was there, we would be told that G4 would be more profitable if they stopped doing X-Play and Attack of the Show and just did more reruns. And part of that was not to make us feel bad, but was to, sort of underscore that, you do the things you need to do to make money so you can do the things that make you proud. But it was also a reality that if they were to stop doing this stuff, the network would be more profitable. So G4's dead. There may still be some things that go on there, but consider it dead because it has been for a while.
Fair enough. Fable Anniversary has been delayed until February. Is this a big deal for the Xbox One launch, or is this kind of a marginal thing in the grand scheme of things?
Well, that's actually a 360 game.
Oh, that is a 360. Oh, Jesus Christ, you're right. What am I even talking about?
I don't know. I'm never gonna play that, but
yeah,
that's cool, I guess. I played a little bit of Fable 1, but if they were doing a Fable 1 upgrade for the Xbox One, maybe I might be curious to check it out because February seems like a time when there won't be no games to play on that machine. But if
I don't
that's
know why
an Xbox,
I thought that was an Xbox One thing, but
they just announced that other Fable game at Gamescom.
Yeah.
So and that game's not coming into 2014, if it even comes then.
Right.
So I don't know. If they announce Fable Anniversary delayed to February 2014 so that they can do an Xbox One version, then I might be interested.
Sure.
Otherwise, I think I will probably pass.
Yeah. Blitz Games regrettably shut its doors this week after 23 years of development. Do you have any favorite Blitz games, Patrick?
What is Blitz Games made?
Well, I'll tell you what mine is.
Okay.
Sneak King.
They made that?
They made Sneak King.
All right, great. Then I'm on board.
All right.
I'm Sneak King is my vote too.
All right. And then last one, Microsoft has officially bought the URL xbone.com. That is the very same URL that I believe this very same nickname that Larry Herb said that he found kind of insulting to all the hard work that had been done on the Xbox One, and now Microsoft owns xbone.com. Is that really an insulting nickname? I don't think it is.
I think that might be taking I mean, I don't use that term. I think it's just dumb. But
sure.
I think it is meant to be, endearing in a weird, ironic sort of way. And it makes sense that Microsoft would buy that because they're trying to avoid a dumb parody site, which would inevitably crop up. So it makes sense they would buy that so they can just squat it, basically.
Yeah, and that's what I'm sure it will just redirect to xbox1.com or whatever. So there you go.
See, I would think it would just not be anything, but I think it would be funny on their part if it actually redirected. I think that is the appropriate way for them to handle that.
Oh, yeah.
Is to have that redirect to xbox.com.
Totally.
Okay.
That's all I got.
All right. Well, why don't let's take some questions. Let's see what we got.
I love this idea.
I'm not sure. Have we ever talked? Have you played Bully?
I have not finished Bully. I did play about 2/3 of Bully.
Okay. This is a pretty decent question, unrelated to a lot of the things we've talked about today. But David Johnson asks, it's me specifically, but I'm sure you'll have thoughts. Why do you always get super bummed and upset when people leave the games press to go make games? For me, that is sort of a twofold answer. One, it's that it bums me out when talented people go off to do something else. The games press is better served by having smart people in it. So when they leave to go do something else, that is a bummer up front. And then secondly, it points to sort of a systemic and structural problem in the games press, which is that it is not designed to support people growing up and having kids and owning houses and things of that nature, both from where often people find themselves having to live to do their jobs, and also just there are very few jobs that eke into the six figures for people that want to be sort of the breadwinner and and whatever you want to do with your family. The press is not sort of built to allow people to do that, and so oftentimes that is a primary reason why people leave, is because they can kind of get an immediate pay grade by just going to do a job somewhere else, where the base level salaries for someone of their skill set is much higher, and so it's both of those reasons that it definitely bums me out when I hear people have left, because it just sort of reinforces that it's still an issue.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think I'm less saddened by it because I'm sort of the opinion that, whatever makes you happy or whatever works best for you is what you should be doing. So whenever someone says, hey, I've got this job, in the other side of the industry, and, that's what's going to be good for them, then I'm like, sure, by all means. I mean, like you, I am saddened when talented people go elsewhere, but I don't know. I feel like this is happening not as much as maybe it used to be. And I mean that in the context of people who are getting into games writing over the last, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years, I feel like are a lot more people that very specifically wanted to get into that field. I feel like a lot of people who started, in the years before I did, and maybe in around the time I did, a lot more of those people were just people that kind of found their way into it one way or another. It wasn't necessarily their lifelong goal. It wasn't what they went to school for necessarily, but it was just sort of like, that was what life found for them. And I think in those cases, a lot of those people, they just know they want to work in games somehow. And, when they're presented with an opportunity to maybe go actually make something or, produce something, they're going to do that. I think now, because there are more people that seem like they are very specifically interested in writing about games, not necessarily making games, but writing about games, I don't know. I feel like we're not going to get as much of that as time goes on. I mean, it may end up being a necessary thing, like you talked about, if there aren't enough jobs and there aren't enough positions to go around that, really support those people. But I don't get the burning sensation from a lot of the younger writers that I talk to, people that have been around, the last 5 years or so, that they really want to go do that, or they have any real interest in going to do that. Whereas back in the day, I certainly knew my share of writers who were just like, yeah, I love doing this, but if the right production or development job came along, then I might seriously consider it.
Yeah, and I have no interest in going into development, but I sort of have the same perspective there that kind of the note that you left on. I'd like, if the right thing came along and it made sense, or if Dave Lang put me in a body bag and forced me to work at Iron Galaxy, you can't rule it out. I don't know I couldn't say I'd be doing what I'm doing right now 10 years ago. So to presume I know exactly what I want to be doing in 10 years is also crazy too. But I can at least say, for the time being, Patrick Klubik, 28 years old, wants to keep doing games journalism and writing about games and chatting with people about games. But it's you just don't know what your life circumstances are going to be, and sometimes you have to make compromises and changes to accommodate that. So we shall see.
I think
and you're one of the few people who went to the other side, and you came back.
Yeah,
I did. Happens.
And that's because I never had any real hot desire to get into game development or production or PR or any of that stuff. I did it because that job sounded awesome. That one job that they offered me sounded super rad, and I was like, oh yeah, I should try that. After working on the other side for a while, I realized this is not really where I belong long term. But that job being as awesome and having as much crazy shit to do in that gig was what lured me away. And then after a couple of years eventually I just kind of hit the point. I was like, no, you know what? I like being a writer more. I like being on that side of things more. And, obviously the movie thing came up, and then Giant Bomb came along, and now here I am again, writing about games.
Yeah, it seems like those Harmonix dudes, they have some fun doing their job.
Yeah, they, in the right situation, they can do a lot of really crazy stuff.
Let's see. Brian Artist Jackson asks, since both next-gen consoles are so similar, what's going to be your deciding factor on where to play your games? I guess up front, before we answer that question, are you planning to get both at launch?
Yeah, I have both pre-ordered for for work purposes mostly. But yeah, if it was just me, my own money, I might go PS4 and then wait on Xbox. But at this point, it was such a close decision. I was like, I should just get both for work. So
yeah, and I'm doing the same thing. So okay, presuming that not presuming, this is fact. We both have pretty decent PCs. We could play most games on the PC.
Yeah.
we're gonna have both consoles. Like for you, like what is your consideration? Obviously this is all sort of speculative. We don't know
Sure.
what sort of weirdness is gonna actually be there in the hardware and the interfaces and blah 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 blah. But all things set aside, right now, like what is your considerations over which machine you would want to use to play your games on?
Well, I can tell you what it was last generation. It was where my friends list was. And for 90% of the last generation, my friends list has been on Xbox, just because that was the easiest one to maintain. That was where I just, that was the platform I spent the most time playing kind of anyway. So that was where I just kind of built it up. I really have no PlayStation Network friends list to speak of, and I kind of don't intend to really, build that out too much over time. And I have barely a Steam friends list. So that was kind of where I stuck things. Where this one goes, I mean, I'm expecting that I'll probably at least start off with, kind of the Xbox One stuff, but I'm also expecting to play a lot of PS4 games. So it just kind of depends on where my friends sort of tend to gravitate toward, where, people that I would actually want to play multiplayer games with, which I don't always do, will sort of gravitate toward, and what's easier to maintain. I kind of like having certain platforms as my kind of like, this is where I go to play things away from everyone else every now and again, like a lot of single player stuff, things that don't require competitive or cooperative stuff. So that's kind of what like Steam has been for me and what PlayStation was for a while. But I think, I'm guessing I'll start with Xbox, and then at some point, if PS4, more people I know start playing that system and that becomes their primary system, I may end up shifting that way. It just depends.
Yeah, I definitely think talking to the people I know, there's a lot of momentum for PS4 being sort of, if I've got to pick one. Most people aren't crazy enough or dumb enough, however you want to characterize it, to spend $1,000 on two machines in November
It can
when
be
there
both.
Yeah, but it does seem like the people are pretty excited about PS4. But I think a lot of that is assuming all the interface stuff works out,
Right.
and a lot of that remains theoretical. And a lot of that's going to be once sort of boots on the ground, once we have a sense of how that stuff has actually turned out, how it shakes out. And I don't know. Yeah, I still play so many things on the PC. I'm privileged enough to have access to a Steam Press account, so I will continue to probably play a lot of stuff on the PC. Unless there are maybe similar services set up for Xbox One and PS4. Fingers crossed, because that would make covering things 1,000 times easier. But that is something so specific to our jobs. Yeah, well,
I've bought way more games on Steam over the last like year and a half than I have on any console platform at this point.
And part of that, and the same way for me, is I know there are some games that will, of course, become incompatible as there are new operating systems, as new hardware comes out, and that stuff just won't function anymore. But I can be pretty sure 95% of my games, if I buy one on Steam, in 5 years, I'm going to be able to play that game still, and it's going to look better than it did before. And that is not something that is ever going to be a guarantee on consoles.
No.
So I have a pretty good suspicion that multiplayer games that I do decide to engage with, and I am at this point pretty excited for Titanfall, although that's coming to PC too, so I don't know.
But I'm going to play that one on Xbox because I feel like that's what they're pushing.
Yeah, and I'll play those multiplayer games on console, but if I have the ability to run it and I can play it, I'm probably going to do it on PC just for legacy reasons. I'm not much of a hoarder, but when it comes to digital stuff, it's not even something you have to worry about because it's not taking up space anymore.
It's hard drive space at most.
Yeah, or it's just, do you want to download this to your hard drive? It's just a checkbox in your library. So I think, given that I'm in a position to choose between the three, I think I will probably kind of remain sort of PC as, PC is the Switzerland. It's sort of agnostic. It stays out. And that'll work just fine for me. Let's see. Why don't we pull up one more before we shut this thing down? Oh, B. Christ says, a write-down is an accounting term. It means that they are just going to put it as a loss. They don't expect to make any return on it. So
I was basically
you were right. Basically right.
Hooray. I like it when I'm right about things.
Slammer of Jams, Pokemon X and Y. Any of you guys care? No.
I feel like we asked this question last time. I think this was on the last episode. So let's not end with that one. I explained my Pokemon thing last time.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Surely someone must have a good question out there.
Okay, here's one. It's kind of building off of what we were talking about with some games media stuff. Gangs asked, what do you think about alternate games media like game reviewers on YouTube, e.g., Total Biscuit?
Mm. This is an interesting question because you. So we're specifically talking about critics, not just about people who do long plays and stuff like that, right?
Let's widen it out. Let's
widen it out.
Let's widen it out and just like what is your perspective on sort of the rise of just sort of YouTube and Twitch plays into this as well, but where people are making money is really on YouTube.
Yeah.
The rise of these different personalities like Total Biscuit and PewDiePie and folks of this nature who are covering games and have millions of subscribers and are very popular, but on a medium that our videos are on YouTube, but it's something different entirely.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, conceptually, a lot of the things that we do video-wise are in the same ballpark as what those guys are doing, but it is with a very different structure, different level of oversight, different kind of, I don't know, standards and practices, I guess. So, on a conceptual level, I have zero problem with what they're doing, and I think that it's kind of great that people are able to, sort of make a name for themselves just by being personalities and having similar interests to an audience and being able to cultivate that audience and, kind of, get people behind you just by playing games that people love and are interested in and want to talk about. If I have a concern, and I'm going to be careful when I say this because I don't want to get accusatory or say anything weird, but there is a lack of oversight with some of that stuff, and when you're talking about what those people's opinions might be, the games that they're promoting, working on, the question is whether you can call that really coverage in the sense of like what we do, in the sense that we're trying to be independent of publishers and that kind of stuff, versus just kind of you're using this as playing these games makes you money. So when you get certain access to games, or when you get games sent to you by publishers, sometimes maybe there is the theory that you're getting those with the express purposes of basically being a marketing arm for a game, whether you intend to or not. Granted, games media has been technically a marketing arm for publishers for a long time. We run their trailers, we put their screenshots up, we get hands-on coverage through their sources. The difference is, other than advertising, we never take money or any sort of like compensation for that stuff. I don't know what the oversight level is for a lot of those YouTube people. I don't know what their financial thing is. I don't know how I don't know what their level of separation is from the publishers who are giving them access to these games. So that's the thing. And again, I don't know what it is, so I'm not sure how when it comes to trusting those guys and being like, well, I'm taking their opinions, completely at face value, I don't entirely know. But I also don't watch a lot of that stuff because, when I want those kinds of opinions, I tend to go to more traditional sources. I'm someone who just tends to read a lot of reviews because I like just reading traditional reviews. From an entertainment perspective and from, being able to kind of make money on that stuff, I mean, again, I say more power to them, good for them, finding a way to make games work for them. But, I don't think it's the same thing, and I think if you start trying to treat the YouTube stuff, as straight, as like, an alternative or something even along the same lines as like, what traditional games media is, I think that there's a lot less checks and balances with stuff like that, personally.
Yeah, I think it's early days for a lot
Sure.
of this. Like it's just kind of getting off the ground. You're just getting some personalities to really emerge. You're just starting to get companies to pay attention. And you're right. There are sort of different classes of these personalities where you have people that like there are publishers that have programs that are specifically about giving money to some of these guys based on the amount of views that come through for the videos that they've been given access to. These are not people like Total Biscuit. Like I want to be very clear about this. Like I'm a big fan of Total Biscuit's work. He does really, really good stuff. I was so heartened to see one thing he did earlier this week was he wanted to see Brothers get to #1 on Steam on the sales chart. So he did a video, showing why this game is great, advocating for it. and then spent a lot of that week like sort of fighting this backlash of people thinking he was just a marketing arm and that had been funded by 505 Games and him trying to work through, I think, some arguments that we have dealt with over the years, like just as the media in general, of like, where are those gray lines? And I think that stuff is going to shake out as this just goes forward, as it matures, and it's ultimately going to come down to pretty similar lines of what we tell people. It's like Giant Bomb has some close, interesting relationships with a number of developers in the industry. Harmonix, Double Fine, folks that we bring on our shows that we interact with, where we just have to tell people to kind of trust us. And if you don't trust us, then you should go somewhere else. And I don't mean that in a condescending tone. I mean it in you should go to places where you trust the people who are saying, giving you buying advice, and you are you want to trust the people that you spend your time with. And so if somehow we have lost that, I'm sorry, but I want you to go find places that works for you. And I think that is going to apply to the YouTube crowd as well. And for people that are just getting started in this line of work, if you are not paying attention to what's happening on YouTube, if you are not figuring out how video structures into ways to cover games, you are really, really limiting yourself in terms of potential opportunities in the next 5 to 10 years, because that's where the money is going. That is, selfishly part of the reason I have gotten into streaming, is to get a better sense of what that is. Do I fit into that equation? If I do fit into that equation, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And knowing how that's going to work out over the next 5 to 10 years, when that is going to just become more and more prominent in games coverage, is just, you got to survive in this hellish landscape of media. And we all try and figure that out in our own ways.
And I mean, this is something that's been brewing in various mediums for a while. Like, there have been people on YouTube, sort of taking the alternative to, say, film critics for a long time. There are lots of people that, do video essays or, long rants or whatever about movies that have, cultivated massive followings. And that was something that a lot of movie writers and critics sort of lamented at a certain point, the kind of democratization of, criticism and that kind of stuff. And that's what the internet has basically been the forum for the last several years. So this is just another extension of that. This is just another extension of democratizing coverage and perspective on the internet, where people can, like you said, they can essentially build up an audience and then a following just by kind of playing these games and being an advocate for games. And I think that's the thing that needs to get separated out, is who are the people that are aiming to be advocates and make money in the process, and who are the people who are just kind of there to make money and be marketing arms. Like, that's the thing that there needs to be some separation between, and I think that that's something a lot of the YouTube crew is still kind of sussing out over time. Like, the people who are doing that stuff are sussing out. But like you said, in the cases of people who are very clearly doing, just kind of going the advocacy route and just want to cover the games they think are cool, more power to them. It's great, and
that's what we do.
Give more people more perspectives, is never a bad thing, especially if you're good at it. And if you know how to talk to an audience, and you know how to present a game, and you can do it well, then there's absolutely, like, I wish those people absolutely nothing but the best, and hope that I hope that at some point it grows beyond just a bunch of people on YouTube. Like, I hope that those people start to find their own places where they can do it, and where they can kind of work on their own terms, as opposed to just kind of under the blanket YouTube banner. But I imagine that's probably at least a few years away at this point.
Yeah, well, we will see how that shakes out. But that's gonna bring to this is a lengthy Bombin in the AM. We
had some stuff to talk
about. So that'll bring the show to a close. Appreciate everyone tuning in and jumping onto YouTube and watching. Look at that. We ended on a discussion about YouTube as we are broadcasting on YouTube.
I wish we could say we planned that.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and pocket that check, and I'll make sure and split that with you on the side. But yeah, I will see you on Monday. I don't know how many games I'll play, so hopefully you play a bunch of games.
I have tonight to myself for the first time in a while, so I got started on Saints Row this week. I'm going to try and blow through as much of it as I can tonight. I will hopefully have more to talk about with that next week.
All right. Well, Alex, I will talk to you on Monday.
Ow! Ooh.